So today we have a super fun webinar planned. Thank you all for joining and attending. We are going to be using some blankets, maybe a bolster, or if you don't have that, additional blankets, and something to cover your eyes, whether that might be a folded scarf, or if you do have an eye pillow, these are very handy. Is something that will block the light out and eliminate any distraction that might come. So we're going to get started just by sitting for a moment, and I wanted to highlight a little bit about the topics we're going to go through today, and then we'll just practice really experiencing whatever this idea of meditation is or concentration is. So really, meditation is just about being fully present and conscious in the moment as things are. It's not really meant to be a goal or having an aim to attain something specific, but instead more so just being present. As you might notice, if you do start to reflect on your own habits and, if you do start to reflect on your mind in a more conscious manner, you might have noticed that the brain likes to wander. Sometimes our thoughts are quite scattered, or it can be difficult to focus just in a normal day since there is so much going on. And then there is a lot of stimuli coming in. Brain is constantly processing information, and when we are submerged in an information-filled world, sometimes it can be quite overwhelming. So this practice of meditation has been a practice for many, many years. It is an ancient technique, really meant to draw inward for the search of happiness, was the initial intention of meditation. As things have evolved and science has really done more studies, we've been able to see what is meditation doing and what are the different types of meditation that we might be able to practice on a regular basis. Today, there's going to be a few styles of meditation that we're going to get into. And when I say that, I want to reiterate, there's a variety of different types of meditation that you might engage in. Just remember that true, ultimate, distilled, ancient meditation is simply being present and being conscious of the present moment. Now, once we do clear our minds, it creates a doorway to choose what we focus on. And that brain training is really where science currently is seeing a lot of the power being. Traditionally, it was for mental and emotional health. Now there are biologists and neuroscientists that are actually seeing that when we focus our mind on envisioning what we want to experience in life, we actually begin to change our biochemistry. We actually begin to make choices that are more in line with that desire. And in effect, we can create it in our lives. Not only on a emotional and mental plane, but also when it comes to physical health. And so an example of this is a doctor named Dr. Joe Dispenza. He's a neuroscientist that has actually used meditation and his specific type of meditation, which he considers rewiring, to heal his spine. He had broken his spine in a variety of places, was told that he would most likely be paralyzed for most of his life and lucky if he ever walked again. And he simply visualized his brain healing. He was able to mentally picture that process, and he did it over and over and over again for longer durations of time throughout the day. And from what I'm aware, within a couple of years, he was fully healed. And so this is not only the only example of that practice, but now Dr. Joe has been inspired to study thousands of other people who have very similar stories of healing themselves from chronic illnesses. So that's kind of, there's this spectrum of meditation that we can practice. There's this emotional, mental balance and healing, this mental clarity that some might be seeking. And then there's also this attribute of physical health and physical wellness that others might see or desire. So regardless of what your goal is, today we're going to go through a couple of practices that are going to prepare you to integrate this style of meditation into your day-to-day life. So to get started today, we're really just going to begin breaking down the practice into different attributes. And then towards the end of the webinar, we're going to kind of meld all of these practices in together as one. And then I will give you a chance to just practice on your own without much of my guidance. There's two types of meditation. If you want to really put them in folders or categorize them, there's seated meditation or guided meditation, and then there's seedless meditation, which is unguided. And so you're going to hear, sometimes we might hear people say that they have an easier time with guided meditations. And usually that's generally the truth for everybody who's just beginning this practice, is that it's very helpful to have someone guiding you through the process when the mind might wander. But it's important that we take the time to practice on our own without that guide, because then we really know and we can really authentically assess where our own mind is in that ability to concentrate and to focus. Another thing to be aware of is that this takes time. It's not something that will just magically come into ease overnight. This is something that people practice for long periods of time, or multiple times a day, or at least every day for an extended period, in order to see real benefits and some sense of ease and understanding of the process. So I hope that this can be an initial stepping stone towards you maybe observing that opportunity in your life. We're just going to get started. Really, we're going to dive in. So we're actually going to start by moving the body a little bit. One of the biggest distractions to meditation or concentration is physical pain and physical stiffness. And as we feel physical stiffness or discomfort, it's very difficult to focus the mind on our breath or to focus our mind on some other goal when that's in the background distracting us. There are certain situations where, doing a couple of stretches maybe isn't going to cause you ease. Maybe there is a certain level of discomfort that you feel on a regular basis, no matter how much you stretch or how much yoga you do, and that is something to be mindful of. Maybe you won't be meditating for such long periods and long durations, and instead in shorter bursts and throughout the day when you have some sense of physical ease. But for us today in class, considering time, we're really just going to start by stretching the legs, stretching out the torso, really creating some space in our physical body before we get started with any breath work and meditation. So you don't necessarily need a mat today. We are going to start in downward facing dog or Adho Mukha Svanasana. If you have some discomfort coming down on your knees or putting pressure and weight on your hands, you can also practice this position near a wall. So we're going to start either on the hands and knees with the hands slightly forward from the shoulders, knees slightly back from the hips, or you can start with your hands at the wall and step your feet back. One of the main characteristics is that we have the hips bending here at a 90-degree angle. The legs and the arms are straight. As you take a few breaths here, start to come into this pose. Really look to breathe into the sides of your rib cage. As you gently deepen and lengthen your inhale and exhale, that expansion might become a little bit more sensational. And then see if you can start to breathe into the back of your ribs, the back of your lungs. Really spreading the skin across the bottoms of your shoulder blades. So right underneath the shoulders, we have an area in our upper back that seems to be more of a gray area for many. But see if you can breathe into that space and really expand that area. As you try to straighten the legs, making them stick straight, lift your sit bones up and back, opening the backs of the knees, opening the backs of the thighs. Now, if you're in Adho Mukha Svanasana, you're just going to walk your hands back towards your feet. And we're coming to a forward bend here called Uttanasana. If you feel unbalanced in this type of position, you can always slant your hips towards the wall so that you have some support, but it's a standing forward bend. And then let your head hang. So again, this is where the wall can be very helpful, is maintaining our balance. Here as we practice this forward fold, lifting the hips up, take a nice deep exhale, and try to lengthen and soften your spine towards the floor. Just allowing gravity to really lengthen and open the spaces between your vertebrae. As you take a smooth, steady inhale and exhale, soften any tension that might be in your face, such as your eyes, lips, or jaw. Just observe while we're here where the mind goes. With movement, it can be easier to bring the mind into the body. But even with that practice, sometimes our mind will derail into potentially judgments, right? Maybe saying things like, oh, this is too hard, this hurts, I'm not doing something right, or I don't like this. We want to label things as good or bad. And sometimes if things are uncomfortable, we might like to even avoid them. But see if you can try to eliminate some of that duality here. Just accepting what is as you breathe. Sometimes stretching can be uncomfortable. If you feel any pain it's more of a red flag, like pinching or something sharp, that's definitely worth being mindful of, and that can be more of a sign that it's time to add more support or move on from the practice. But if it's just an uncomfortable stretch, see if you can breathe through it for this next moment. In whatever position you're in, try to come to a concave back. And so this means that the back is more so flat, shoulders are rolling onto the spine. As you press your thighs back, lift your chest forward. So rather than allowing the head to hang, now we have the head lifted. And from here, you can either come up to stand, taking your time if you feel any dizziness or lightheadedness, or you can come back down to the floor to a comfortable seated posture. Now we're going to sit down. You can sit down either on a stack of blankets or maybe even a chair if your knees are uncomfortable coming on and off the floor on the lower level. And we'll start with the legs crossed. Here in Swastikasana, which is a simple cross-legged seated posture. We'll have the feet underneath the thighs. The legs are crossed more in the middle of the shins. As you take a nice deep inhale and exhale, try to lift the sides of your rib cage up towards the ceiling. And go ahead and take your thumbs and place them underneath your armpits. So now it almost mimics having suspenders, right? And as you lift the front of your armpits up with your thumbs, try to soften the tops of your shoulders. Let go of any gripping or tension that might be held on the sides of the neck, or really in that thick muscular area that spans across the top of the shoulders. That's the trapezius muscle. Very large, helpful muscle, but it often will do more work than it needs to. So we want it to be soft. And as you keep the upper outer corners of your chest lifting, go ahead and remove your thumbs slowly, but try and keep that general lift of the front of your armpits up towards the ceiling. And see if you can add a little bit more activity to it and actually roll the tops of your shoulders back and down the spine. As you press the bottom tips of your shoulder blades into your body, imagine them feeding through towards your chest. So really you start to create this upper back support with the shoulder blades. And from here, we're just going to do a simple side lean or side stretch. Let's go ahead, I'm going to mirror you. So you can go ahead and place your right hand on the floor and reach the left arm up and overhead. And as you take a few breaths here, open the sides of the rib cage. Rather than just draping over towards the floor, see if you can anchor your left sit bone down and reach through the fingertips. So just as much as we might lean over to the side, we're also lifting up and extending upward. Just notice the characteristics and pattern of your breath. And then coming back through center, we'll switch sides. So reaching the right arm up and overhead. As you take a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. Just tune into your body and observe what sensations are coming up. And attempt to observe your body as an entire unit. Even though one area might be more sensational than another, see if you can spread your awareness to the body in its entirety. As you anchor that right sit bone down, reach the fingertips up, still keeping the shoulders moving down the spine. And then coming back to center, and we'll do each side one more time. So just like we practiced while sitting, having the front of the armpits lifting, shoulders rolling back, try to make sure that that's still happening as we lean over to the right. So even with that left arm lifted, see if you can draw the shoulder blades down the spine, lift the front of the armpits up. You'll lean as you weigh heavy into your left sit bone. Let that be an anchor to stretch from. Breathing into the sides of the spine. Breathing into the side of the rib cage. And then coming back to center. Last side, last time. You might notice that one side stretches a little differently than the other, feels different than the other. Just take note of those details of your body and about yourself. The eyes and the face soft. Notice if any subconscious tension starts to rise in the jaw or other facial features while you move. And then coming back to center, sitting nice and tall. Now we're going to start moving into more of that breath work, but we do want to leave an impression of kind of shaping the body in this upward lift, but also expanding across the upper chest. There's different styles of breathing. This breath practice is called pranayama in yogic texts. And so this is a baseline of meditation, which is just breath work. It's managing our inhale and exhale, which in Sanskrit is called prana. Now, as we breathe, we might think, oh, it's oxygen, it's just breath, it's just air. But the term prana actually means life force. And so really these ancient texts were acknowledging not only are we breathing air, not only are we breathing oxygen, but this is a life force. This is actually what's allowing us the ability to be alive and to live our lives consciously. So it goes a little bit deeper and adds that sense of value to even just breathing, which I feel is very important to consider. Now we're gonna lie down with some support in our upper back. What you're going to need are a couple of blankets and a bolster. If you don't have a bolster, then you're definitely going to need about 3 blankets, I would recommend. So what we're going to do is unfold one of our blankets once from what we'll call shelf fold, and then we're gonna roll the long edge of that. Now, if back bends are something that you practice regularly and you don't have any major low back pain that tends to aggravate you, then you can add an additional blanket onto this roll. If this is one of your first times practicing this, or maybe your low back tends to be a little bit more achy, then 1 blanket rolled is going to be adequate. Now, this is going to go in our upper back. So we're going to need something underneath our head to support us to that same height. An example of this is that if you use 1 rolled blanket for underneath your upper back, you're going to be using about 2 blankets underneath your head. You can always fold these blankets in half to add a little bit more height if that's needed, but this is going to be a fairly minimal setup for what we're looking to practice today. If that single rolled blanket is still a little bit too much and starts to cause aggravation to the low back, then you can just lay down with your head supported on some blankets. We're just really looking to decompress, rest the spine, settle the spine on the floor, and if your back is comfortable with it, adding a little bit of that back bend feature. So you can decide what's best for you today and your setup. I'm going to add an additional rolled blanket to my single blanket. And now that I've created a taller roll, I'm going to need some additional height underneath my neck. And this is where the bolster comes in. So this is another version of the setup. If you've practiced this before, this is something that you're familiar with. This might be what you go to today. So if this is something that you haven't practiced, then you can watch or listen as I walk through this, and then we can come in together and I'll verbally walk you through it again. We're going to start with our feet flat on the floor. So the knees are bent here. The hands are slightly back from the hips. We're sitting on the floor. Then you're going to bring your elbows onto that rolled blanket. We want the elbows to be directly underneath the shoulders. As you press your elbows down, lift the front of your armpits up, just like we practiced in the beginning of class. From here, you're going to spread your elbows out to the sides. You should start to feel that that rolled blanket is quite high on your upper back. It should feel as though it's almost slightly above the armpits. And then you can press into your feet slightly, roll the tops of the shoulders down towards the floor, and your shoulders will fall between that roll in your upper back and whatever support you have underneath your head. So your shoulders tuck nicely into that space. And then you can pull the bolster in to the tops of the shoulders, making it nice and snug. You're welcome to have the arms in what we call a goalpost style position. So that's where the elbows are at a 90-degree angle, but the elbows are lifted in line with the shoulders. Or you can just reach the hands out to the sides and allow them to rest where they might naturally fall. We'll take a few breaths here and then straighten the legs. If at any point your back starts to feel uncomfortable in this position, you can always rebend the knees, which tends to relieve, or you're welcome to roll out and just lay flat on the floor. Now, once we're all finished with this, to come out, we're just going to gently roll over to the side and then press ourselves up. If you do have a lot of light around you, or maybe some visual distractions near you, then you can go ahead and grab your eye cover for this as well. So we're going to go ahead and come into this together and do it again if you haven't already. Starting sitting on the floor with the feet flat, hands are slightly behind the hips, and then you'll bend your elbows down to the rolled blanket. As you press your elbows down, lift the front of the armpits up, feeling that lift of the chest before you even come down. And spread your elbows off to the sides. You should feel that rolled blanket is quite high on your upper back at this point, almost right underneath the armpits, but just slightly higher than that. Because what we're going to do is we're going to slightly press into our feet and roll the tops of the shoulders down to the floor as you shift your body up that rolled blanket. So we're using that rolled blanket to pull the tops of the shoulders down the spine and feed that curl and lift of the chest. And you can pull the support in that's underneath your head as close to your shoulders as you feel comfortable doing. So the shoulders are free from support. We have the head and the neck supported, and this rolled blanket in the upper back. Before you straighten the legs, take a nice deep inhale and exhale in this position here. On your next exhale, gently press into your feet and try to tuck your tailbone towards your heels. So we're creating a little bit more length in the lower spine, in the mid spine, which is called the lumbar spine. And then straighten the legs, having the legs about hip width apart, maybe even a little bit wider. During these first few breaths, keep the legs slightly active. And so what I mean by that is try to press your heels and thighs down into the floor with your toes pointing up towards the ceiling. As you press your thighs down, lift your chest up, lifting those fronts of the armpits. This is a little bit more of an active, supported position laying down. This can be beneficial to release any compression and create a little bit more active decompression in the spine. Soften any tension in the face or the eyes that might subconsciously start to rise when we move or take action. If you have that eye cover and haven't put it on already, you're welcome to do so now. On your next exhale, start to let go of everything, everywhere. Feeling your body settle into the props and settle into the floor. If you notice any discomfort in your low back or your hips, you can always reactivate the legs, or if it still persists, go ahead and bend the knees, bringing the feet flat to the floor. As you slowly lengthen your inhale and exhale, draw your attention inward. As you observe your body and observe your breath, notice the subtle details and characteristics of your inhale and exhale. As you inhale, feel the air flow across your upper lip and into the nostrils as it travels through the airways and down the back of your throat, filling the lungs. Notice that sensation of the lungs expanding. And as you exhale, let go of any tension that might rise. As we take this time to tune into our bodies, really observe what sensations and experiences stand out the most in our own being. Can help bring some awareness and consciousness to what's affecting us without our knowing. As I had mentioned before, in ancient yoga scriptures, it's not just air that we're breathing, but it really is a prana, a life force. And we can control and manipulate that breath and that life force, and how it influences our body. During these next few breaths, try to breathe into the upper outer corners of your chest, right underneath the collarbones. You might even start to feel that breath move along the front of the shoulders. And then on your next few breaths, see if you can breathe into the abdomen, really the sides of the belly. And then for these next few breaths, see if you can breathe into the torso as a whole. So as you inhale, expanding into the upper outer corners of the chest and the sides of the abdomen. And then start to return to your natural, harmonious breath without manipulating the length or duration of your inhale and exhale. As you exhale, let go of everything, everywhere, feeling your body settle down to the floor and into the props. You'll slowly start to bend your knees, bringing the feet flat to the floor. You can roll over to your side and slowly press yourself up to sit. So we're still in that initial phase of just tuning into the body and tuning into the breath patterns before we move too much deeper into these other types of meditations that we're going to practice today. But we are going to change the position that we're in. We're going to move into a pose called Supta Baddha Konasana. This is reclined bound angle pose. So what we're going to need is some support to lay back on, to lay our rib cage on, and then something to place underneath the head. We are going to have the feet together and the knees wide, kind of like that butterfly style pose with the legs. And it's nice to have some support underneath the thighs. So if you have extra blankets, we're just going to take one of those and open them up and then roll the long edge, or you can grab some blocks or some other pieces of support to place underneath the thighs. I'm going to walk you through a couple of prop setup options. If you have a bolster, then this pose is going to be pretty straightforward for you. You'll use a bolster and 2 blankets. If you just have blankets at home, you can unfold them once from shelf fold and then fold them in half lengthwise. And you get this blanket that mimics a bolster size and support. So you can fold and stack a couple of blankets and a couple of wool blankets in order to accomplish that and mimic the height of a bolster. You want to make sure that you have some extra blankets or support nearby to place underneath the thighs and underneath the head if you don't have a bolster or you're limited on the props that you do have. What I personally love to practice underneath the legs is taking a blanket. I'm going to use that for my head, but I'll take a blanket and unfold it twice from shelf fold. And so this is a pretty wide and open blanket here. And then we're going to roll the long edge. This is going to mimic a strap, which you could also use for the legs to hold the legs in. However, keep in mind you're still going to need some support underneath the thighs if you do decide to use a strap. For today, I'm going to be using one of these rolled blankets, a bolster, and then a folded blanket to place underneath the head. If you have it in shelf fold, you can go ahead and fold it over once more from that. Now, if you are at home and you're using minimal props, you don't necessarily have to use such a tall bolster, but having some support of the rib cage would be recommended if at all possible. We can practice this Supta Baddha Konasana without the support underneath the rib cage. But for today's practice, since we are practicing some more breath work, we are really trying to look for that wideness and broadness in the upper chest. I definitely would recommend having something to lay back on. So as you start grabbing your props and getting your setup ready, I'm going to walk through coming into Baddha Konasana, and then I'll show coming out and we'll come back in together. If this is something that you're familiar with and that you've practiced before, then feel free to jump in. We're going to start with the feet together, knees wide, and then you'll have your bolster about 2 fists distance away from your pelvis. We're going to take our rolled blanket and place it on the tops of the feet, and then we're sweeping the tail ends on the floor so we can pin them underneath our thighs and our hips. From here, We're gonna take our hands along the sides of the bolster and come back to that leaning back position. And we can start to lower down on the bolster, adjusting the blanket underneath our head so that the head and the neck are supported with the shoulders free. From here, you can grab onto those tail ends of the rolled blanket, pull the feet in a little bit closer, and then again, pin the ends underneath your hips. This is my personal favorite setup since the rolled blanket does add some support underneath the hips, as well as holding the feet in a little bit closer to the pelvis. If you have any tension in the knees, then pulling the ankles in will be quite uncomfortable. So you wouldn't necessarily use a strap, and instead you would focus on just supporting the outer thighs and the outer hips if that's what you're experiencing. Supta Baddha Konasana, reclined bound angle pose. And then to come out, we're going to bring the knees together and we'll just straighten the legs, taking a few breaths in what we call a supported Shavasana. That's where we'll start to transition into a couple of other styles of meditation. And then to come out, we'll bend the knees, roll off to the side, and press ourselves up. Again, if you have your eye cover, go ahead and have it nearby. So if you haven't come into Supta Baddha Konasana yet, we'll go ahead and do that now. So we'll start with the feet together, knees wide. The bolster is about 2 fists distance away from the pelvis and the hips. And you'll grab the support for underneath your thighs, or you can place your rolled blanket on your feet, sweeping the tail ends underneath your hips and pinning them there. And you start to lean back, you can even pause and tuck your tailbone towards your heels before laying down on the bolster or support. Make sure that the head and the neck are supported comfortably. And then go ahead and grab the tail ends of your rolled blanket. Feel free to pull the feet in a little bit closer. And then tuck the tail ends once more. Before you start settling too much, take a moment to squeeze the shoulder blades together. Tuck the shoulder blades on your back. You might even be able to move from side to side, and as you pull the shoulder blades down, use the bolster to create some resistance and hold them in place. You'll have the wrists maybe a foot or two away from the hips. Overall, you should feel that there's some space in the side waists and near the armpits. As you take a few breaths here, feel your body settling into the floor and settling into the props. With every inhale and every exhale, let go of any tension that might have subconsciously risen. As we start to work with prana and life force, we can directly influence our nervous system and ultimately our energy levels. For today's practice, we're going to be focusing on soothing and cooling the nervous system more so than energizing it. Just start by observing the natural harmony of your inhale and exhale. This is what your breath does when you're not attempting to change anything. Just noticing how your breath moves without your intervention. As you start to do any type of breath work, if you feel any tension or strain start to rise, this is the style of breathing that you should come back to. this natural, effortless breathing for your body, for your nervous system. And during these next few breaths, try to lengthen your exhale. So a normal inhalation with a deeper exhalation. Practice this for 3 to 5 breath cycles and then return to your natural breathing. As you extended your exhale, you might have noticed that there's a transition point at the end of the exhale, but before the inhale. And see if you can lengthen that space just slightly during these next few breaths. So normal inhalation, extended exhalation, allowing that transition period to linger slightly at the end of the exhale. Avoid holding the breath in a way that causes tension. Really allow that lingering to feel as if you could settle or let go at the end of the exhale. Once you've done that for 3 or 5 breath cycles, go ahead and return to normal breathing. Next, we'll practice that longer inhalation, longer exhalation with that slight retention. So we've taken some time to focus on the breath. We've taken some time to observe our body and our breath together. I want you to go ahead and place one of your hands on your heart, one of your hands on your abdomen. As you take a few breaths here, filling the rib cage, filling the lungs. Allow your abdomen and your torso to fill and expand at the same rate. So here we're using our hands and that sense of touch to act as an anchor for our mind. Just focusing on the body and the breath and how breathing feels. And you can remove the hand that's on your abdomen, keeping your hand on your heart. As you breathe, start to focus on your heart and your heartbeat. Appreciate your heart, appreciate your body, and appreciate your breath. Just by taking some time to focus on the heart, we're practicing mind heart coherence, harmonizing the mind and the body. And you can rest your hands on the floor. Still focusing on the length of your breath and your heart space. Observe your body as an entire unit. If you'd like, you can remain resting with the legs straight, or you could even cross the legs. If you cross your legs, feel free to use some support around your shins. Just finding a comfortable position that's the most supportive and relaxing for you. After taking some time to focus on the body and focus on the breath, we want to remember that peaceful state, that slightly simplified state. As we start to engage our mind and imagination into our meditation practice, I want you to start by envisioning your happy place. What does that setting in your mind look like? An example might be a grassy meadow in a forest with a river. Others might find sitting on the beach, listening to the ocean to be their happy place. Or perhaps It's sitting on a lake shore, surrounded by mountains. Whatever location or setting resonates most with you, notice the details of this space. Notice any colors or sounds that stand out. And start to think about what being in this space feels like. If you're sitting on grass, acknowledge how the grass feels underneath you or in your hands. If you're sitting on sand, notice how the sand might feel. What does the presence of this environment feel like? Imagine taking some time to breathe and focus on your heart in your happy place. Just taking this time to pull out and evoke a calm and content emotional state. Using our happy place to create a sense of peace. Let go of any tension that you might be holding or that might have risen. And observe your body as an entire unit, recalling that feeling of what it was like to be in your happy place. This is a feeling that we want to be able to remember. We want to be able to spontaneously call upon. We can feel how the imagination has the ability to change our experience, to change how we feel. That understanding is the base of a meditation style called rewiring. As we start to move into a rewiring practice, I want you to take a moment and identify what areas of your life you feel might need change or that aren't exactly as you want them to be. Sometimes that desire to fix or control actually makes us feel stuck and stifled when we can't change the things around us. Let go of that tension, let go of any physical tension that might have risen while thinking about that. Now, considering these areas of your life, start to think about what they would be like if the experiences were exactly as you wanted them to be. Start to envision the details. How would your interactions change? How would your daily life change? Then acknowledge, how would you change? What would be different about you as an individual as you experienced what it is you want most? Taking some time to just absorb that feeling rather than attempting to logically justify the experience. Set the doubts aside. Really spend this time allowing your imagination to run free, thinking about how your experience would be different if you had what it is you desire most in these areas of your life that you might be feeling stuck in. And keeping that feeling in mind, start to focus on your breath, focus on your body. Imagine integrating that feeling into who you are now. Allowing your imagination to leave an impression of what that experience would be like for you. Start to feel that difference between who you are now and who that person is. that you want to become. How can we embody that excitement and that energy and expression of what we feel we might want most? And slowly place your hands on your abdomen. Take this moment to appreciate your body. Take this moment to appreciate who you are, what you've become. And take a moment to appreciate who you are becoming. And before coming up, we're going to lie down in Shavasana, just laying flat on the floor with some support underneath our head. And bring the legs together, gently roll to your side to come off the bolster or any props. Shift those props away. And then with a blanket underneath your head, go ahead and lie down flat on the floor. Letting go of everything, everywhere. Just taking a few breaths to absorb their experience. In Shavasana, allow your mind to be focused on your breath and your body. Even though we played with the imagination and the mind, take this time just to feel the experience of the present moment. And slowly roll to your side. Take a few breaths there before pressing yourself up to a comfortable seated posture. Feel free to use the props around you to sit comfortably. I appreciate you all for taking the time to practice with me today. Namaste. Well, thank you for joining me